Even though we technically covered verse 10 last time, let's just start with verse 10. It's kind of better fitting for the context. So this first section will be from verse 10 up to verse 12. So you could just follow along with me if you would. It says, this is not Sunday morning. I'm in Luke, so I better go to my other Bible ribbon, which is 2 Samuel. And you know, it's funny, we're like in chapter 20 on both. That's probably why I got so confused. I'm like, oh yeah, see chapter 20, this is where it's supposed to be. Anyway, sorry. Verse 10. But Amasa was not on guard against the sword which was in Joab's hand. So he struck him in the belly with it and poured out his inward parts on the ground and did not strike him again. Then he died. The youth are like, man, we should come to you once the dance more often. This is crazy. But then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba the son of Bichri. Now, verse 11, there stood by him one of Joab's young men and said, whoever delights in Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. But Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the highway. And the men saw that, and all the people stood still. So he removed Amasa from the highway into the field and then threw a garment over him. And when he saw that everyone who came by stood still. And we'll pause. So last week, remember, it was Joab who really made it look. It was a deceitful thing of like, oh, I accidentally dropped my sword. But it was really just hiding a different sword that he had also. So it helped him greet Amasa with his guard down, and it gave him the opportunity to do that sneak attack that we're reading there in verse 10. But now that he's laying there dead, and it says wallowing in his blood, which is pretty gruesome, the army is trying to continue to pursue Sheba. And Abishai's trying to rally the people around to be all gung-ho and like, oh yeah, we're for David, we're for Joab, let's just continue the mission. And as many people as trying to go do it, they're still kind of stuck in this awkward spot where like right on the highway, right in plain sight, they're seeing this guy's guts hanging out. And it's a conflicting moment because what they're really saying is like, well, this is the guy that David put in charge. This is the guy where we had commands to go follow him out to Sheba, but now here he is laying there dead. Like, what do we probably do? It's very problematic. So all the men are stunned and they're kind of frozen by what they see. And so the easiest solution at this point in time was just to, verse 11, like drag the guy off the side of the road and dump him. And hide the evidence, throw a garment over him so people aren't distracted by it. And so it's a cover-up. And this is really a cover-up for what we need to see as a sinful moment. Joab murdered him in cold blood. This was not part of the plan of David, and it's not of God's design. And so they're just covering up their sin. And so a spiritual lesson in this, at least one of them, is that Joab's sin didn't just cause Amasa his life, but it started to affect all of the other soldiers too. And there's lots of ramifications of sin, that it's not just an individual thing. Sometimes we think sin is an individual thing, or it's just between me and that one other person, but it's not. It ripples out and it has carryover effects on others, both directly and indirectly. And so this is going to be another thing that we will see even later on in the chapter, like kind of the same idea in like two different ways. And near the end of the chapter, we'll see almost the same exact thing taking place, the same application of sin. But we'll get there eventually. Let's keep reading. This next section is also just very interesting and some good application out of here. In verse 13, so as soon as he was removed from the highway, all the men passed on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. So covering up the sin happened to work. They are all on their way. Now, he went through all of the tribes of Israel to Abel, even to Beth Maacah, and all the Bethrelites, and they were assembled, and they also came after him. So he came, and they besieged him in Abel Beth Maacah, and they cast up a siege ramp against the city, and stood by the rampart, and all the people who with Joab were wreaking destruction in order to cause the wall to fall. And so we'll pause there before there's an intervention that happens here. We're noticing that for now, at least, Joab's sinful actions appear to be working for his benefit, right? Everyone follows after him, and everyone is very specifically seeing him as the leader. Like Amasa's body was dragged off the road, and they're all able to move forward again. But then did you notice, like the verbiage that it says in there, that they all specifically followed Joab? And so the people are already linking right away that Joab is the new commander. He's in control again, even without a formal announcement, right? There isn't a declaration by King David, but Joab's just the guy. He takes his position back and everybody follows him. And so the problem is, though, just how quickly that the people are now following a person who is like known for being defiant to the king. Like there's many things that Joab does that's great, but there's a lot of things that he does that is not great. And his rebellion against David really just even comes full circle even later on. This is just one more part of Joab's selfish ambition and just doing whatever's right in Joab's own eyes. Later on, when David's reign is handed down to his son Solomon, there's like a little split between Solomon and Adonijah, just another guy trying to take the throne. And Joab goes to support Adonijah. So going against the house of David. He just thinks, oh, this is what's best for me. This is going to be the right move. And then eventually his sin finally catches up to him because that's what ultimately leads to Joab's death. So it will kind of catch up to him. And so this is not just a moment in the text to say, well, there's a change in command of David's army. I think it's a warning to talk about this unchecked sin of continuing to do what's right in your own eyes. That's what Joab is. That's what we see him here doing. And his selfish ambition might seem to work for him here, but if we look at the long run of Joab's life, these verses just paint a little tiny illusion of success for Joab. He does not have success in the long run, and it's a reminder that sin never stays small. It spreads, it hardens our heart, and it eventually, what we'll see with Joab, it will catch up to him. So we see him doing good here now, but it doesn't stay that way. And notice in verse 14, they're moving up north in pursuit of Sheba, and the kingdom is still pretty divided. But as we kind of read in this text, the division is actually seeming to work well, like in David's favor, because Sheba was able to go rally and get a lot of people against David from the different tribes. But verse 14, Joab went through all the tribes of Israel, it says. So despite Sheba's success, that he was able to, get some people to have this division in the nation, there's still plenty of people who remain loyal to David because now they're teaming up and they're going to go hunt Sheba down. They're having a change of heart maybe even. Who knows exactly how they're coming together, but they're coming together on David's side. So we're seeing that this chapter has a lot of bloodshed. It's pretty gruesome. There's a lot of rebellion. There's a lot of selfishness and pride. And there's so many negative things that we see from certain people in this chapter. But God still has a faithful remnant for the king whom he has chosen. And I think that should encourage us. Because no matter how dark things might look, like especially here in this, God's purposes are never overthrown. Not in David's life and not in our life. And we live in a time where if I just look, not even just in our state or our country, but our world, it seems like almost everywhere you go, the world has turned its back on Christ. But God is still preserving a remnant of people who are loyal to the one true King of Kings, Jesus. The remnant is still there. God always keeps a people for himself, and his kingdom will not fail. And seeing David still yet get established throughout all the chaos is just a small little glimmer of hope and proof of that. So for us as Christians, just be encouraged that we're always on the side of victory. Always on the side of victory. And just sometimes it's just going to be a little element. Maybe you have to look forward in faith because you look at your current circumstances and it's like, yeah, you know what, right now I don't really feel victorious, but God's word remains true and we will be victorious, especially if we look far enough to the final victory in heaven. But we are always on the side of victory. So a little glimmer for David. He's getting closer and closer to victory. And the chapter ends really on a good note of him being pretty victorious. Moving on to verse 15, Joab and his men finally get to this city and they besiege it. It's a city called Abel Beth Maacah. It's hard to pronounce that Hebrew name. I'm just kind of taking a stab at it. I don't know, you can read a lexicon and correct me, I suppose. But I did some research and found that this is a city way up in the north of Israel, right on like the Lebanese border. And it was a well-fortified city. It had big, thick, strong walls. It had a sturdy gate. Just the defenses were on point in this particular city. So if you're a man out on the run trying to flee from David, because now you realize him and his men and a bunch of the rest of the nation are all out to get you, you're going to need a strong, fortified city, and this one fits the bill really, really well. But it's kind of a bummer because if we think back to what David said back in verse 6, I have it on the screen for you in the New Living Translation version. He says, quick, take my troops and chase after them before he gets into a fortified town where we can't reach him. So because of their delay, that's exactly what happened. He was trying to prevent this. He's like, he knew that this is just the inevitable outcome. If we don't act now, our problems will only be more difficult. So I think this is a very powerful spiritual principle that maybe we obviously know that just flat out disobedience is going to make life and circumstances all the more difficult. But even in a situation like this, even if you have, like with Amasa, just a delayed obedience, then that also brings a lot more difficulty than there has to be. Because if he would have just listened to David in the first place, they wouldn't have been into this particular predicament. So spiritually, the longer we let our sin or rebellion go unchecked, the stronger those walls around it happen. And it's just going to be a deeper rooted sin issue that, it could take, a whole siege, which means it just could take longer to root out of our life than if it would just be a quick, decisive action. If we catch it early, it's easier to pluck out. But once it takes its roots and starts affecting even some of the other people, there's more damage control that has to happen. And so that's why God tells us to take sin very, very seriously. And we'll see that even just a little bit later on in this very chapter. We are to take sin seriously, because when we don't, it just makes life harder. So now they're having to do this siege. If you look at verse 15, Job's men build this ramp, just a mount of dirt and stones, and they're trying to get as close to the wall as possible. And the language that is used is very aggressive language. They start wreaking destruction, is what at least it says here in the LSB and in the NASB and others. And so it's just a strong word picture when you look it up. It talks about like the physical effort that they're beating, and they're trying to basically somehow break those walls down. They're trying to break through it. And again, this is a well-fortified city, so this is going to take a lot of effort to literally knock these walls down and get through it. And so thinking about how much effort it takes to conquer this rebellion, it's so much harder than it had to be. Going back to that idea of like delayed obedience. Well, hopefully we learn from that. We don't make things harder on ourselves than they have to be. Physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, all the things. We don't want to be harder than it has to be. But I want to, as we get into this next section, point out the fact that while they're hunting down Sheba and there's going to be a lot of destruction, that says they're literally wreaking destruction on this wall, it's not everybody that was inside the city is in rebellion against David. Right? There's a lot of innocent people living in this town that they just went and kind of commandeered because it's a fortified city and they're trying to hide out in it. A lot of people are now, innocent people are terrified knowing that they're about to suffer because of Sheba's rebellion. So like what we read from verse 12, it's that same picture that sin doesn't just only affect that one individual who's sinning. Like Sheba's sin is now bleeding over and affecting the other people of this fortified city. They're going to potentially have to suffer because of him bringing his men into here. And so, man, for us, let's just kind of just keep that in mind, that our sin will affect other people. And so somewhere inside the city, though, there's a woman who realizes, like, wait a minute, like we're all going to suffer because of this guy? Like this shouldn't be the case. And so she's going to take swift action on how to prevent it. And so just God gives her a word of wisdom. She's seemingly known as a wise woman, and she's going to step up to the plate. And it's because of this particular woman, a lot of innocent people are saved. So let's read that from verse 16 down to verse 22. It says, then a wise woman called from the city, "Hear, hear, please tell Joab, draw near that I may speak with you." So he drew near to her, and the woman said, "Are you Joab?" And he answered, "I am." Then she said to him, "Listen to the words of your maidservant." And he answered, "I am listening." Then she spoke, saying, "Formerly they used to speak in this way, saying, they will surely ask advice at Abel. And thus they ended the dispute." So that fortified city had a really good reputation, is what she's pointing out to him. "And I am of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. So you are seeking to put to death a city, even a mother in Israel? Why would you swallow up the inheritance of Yahweh?" So Joab answered and said, far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. Such is not the case. But a man from the hill country of Ephraim, Sheba the son of Bichri, by name, has lifted up his hand against King David. So give him over alone, and I will go from the city." And the woman said to Joab, "Behold, his head will be thrown to you over the wall." And the woman came and all the people Then the woman came to all the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba the son of Bichri, and they threw it to Joab. So he blew the trumpet, and they scattered from the city, each to his own tent. Joab also returned to the king at Jerusalem. And so basically, her plan, she has a wise word, is just like saying, hey, come on, like remember, we're all Israelites. We're kin, we're family. And you're about to destroy one of Israel's great cities, one that has a reputation for being known for wisdom, that they would come and seek counsel from us and it would bring about the right results. And so even she's being one of those wise women. And so Joab answers and hears us out, and he's like, okay, well, I guess when you put it that way, I just want to make my intentions clear that I don't have to destroy the whole city. Like, if we know who Joab is, he's very willing to do so, but then he just lets them know, like, there's one particular guy, and he's who we're after, and if you give him over to me, then we'll leave peaceably. And very quickly, this woman takes charge. She goes from being like this lowly, humble maidservant, like in her own words, and she just rushes to the leaders of the men and says, we just got to cut this guy's head off and throw it over the wall. It's like, whoa, all right, that's wisdom applied, I guess. That's like, it's a kind of a change of scenery here. No doubt, I don't think this woman was, acting in the butchering of the head, single-handedly, because especially when you read the text, it very literally says, then they cut off the head, not she cut off the head. So God is just using this woman to be a mouthpiece of wisdom to, save a lot of innocent lives. Whoa, oh, TJ's stuff is falling back there. Wow. All right. Thanks, TJ. No. So just really good for her to have that wisdom to persuade other leaders to take action. And now, this may be a little bit of a stretch, but I feel like it's a good stopping point to think and make a spiritual application for us. And some of it my own mind was stirred up with, and some of it I got from reading a commentary. And so I hope that it's not heretical, and hope you enjoy this. So Sheba ran into this city thinking that he was going to find a lot of security from these big, impressive walls. Right? The city was known for its wisdom, but obviously it was known for its fortification. And Sheba may have thought that he was fighting against David in this whole thing, but at the end of the day, he's really fighting against God, because David is God's anointed and chosen king. So in his battle with David, and in God's will and God's plan, Sheba is fighting against God's will and God's plan and fighting directly against God. And that's the reality of what he's chosen to do. So the spiritual principle is no one is safe if we end up going down a road where we find ourselves fighting against God. God will make his will so clear to us, and yet we might want to push back and do it our own way instead. And maybe it's just in a spiritual sense, but people can very easily, we might even do it from time to time, to be like Sheba and run to these little fortified cities that we make up of, where we know what our sin is and we know what we want, and then we try to protect this, our will, and we pursue things, and in our mind, we just kind of like, we justify, and we got to do some mental gymnastics, or sometimes it's just outright rebellion, where God has been so crystal clear on what his will is, but yet we keep doing things to preserve what we want. We build walls around our sin, our pride, and our stubbornness, and what we're doing in those moments, it's just a delusion. If we think we're actually going to get away with it, if we think we're like Sheba, we think we're actually safe, we are not safe, because we can never fight a battle against God and win. It just won't happen. There is no wall high enough or thick enough to protect us if we're resisting God's hand in our life, trying to correct us, trying to show us, trying to guide us. If there's a particular sin and he's wanting to work it out of us, he's going to win that battle. It kind of reminds me of what Gamaliel said in Acts chapter 5, verses 38 and 39. You remember this is a time when the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees are trying to shut up the apostles as they're out doing their evangelism work. He said this, if the plan or action is of men to be sharing the gospel, proclaiming Jesus as the Messiah, then it will be overthrown. But if it is of God, if God is leading these men to share that Jesus is the Messiah, you will not be able to overthrow them. Or else you may be even found fighting against God. And that's essentially what Sheba was doing. He's fighting against God at the end of the day. And it's a battle that he lost. And we will do the same. Hopefully not as gruesome in the sense of what happened to Sheba, but the Lord disciplines them who he loves. And if we are without discipline, we're illegitimate children. And so when we are wandering off into sin, hopefully we start to sense that discipline and that correction, and because it's going to start off just less uncomfortable, and the more we resist, the more uncomfortable it gets. And then pretty soon it just like it could feel necessarily devastating in a sense. But God will do that in order to bring us back into his will. I read a really interesting analogy from a Bible commentary from John Trapp. And I modernized it a little bit because he's like these and thous and all these kind of words. But he said, every man's heart can be looked at as a city with walls around it. And every sin is like a Sheba that lurks within those walls. God calls for Sheba's head. God has no quarrel with us for how we are, but for our sin. And if we love the head of our traitor more than the life of our soul, we will rightly perish under his judgment. And to me, that's just a really great picture that we cannot fight against God and win, but the fact that God doesn't want to destroy our city in particular. He doesn't want to destroy our heart. He doesn't want to destroy our life. He just wants to destroy the sin. He wants to destroy the rebellion. That's what God's after. Can we have that same mentality, be after the same thing? We need to have the mindset that God calls us to deal ruthlessly with sin. I mean, I find it's very similar to Jesus in the New Testament. He's saying, hey, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. If your eye causes you to stumble, plug it out. Like, he's not literally saying to do these things, but can we deal ruthlessly with sin? And if we ignore those spiritual Shebas in our life, then it will eventually be our ruin, and those walls are going to come out. The walls of our own life are going to come crackling down, and we're going to be overtaken with the judgment. So let's be like this wise woman. She recognizes her options. Either the city's going to fall or the rebels got to die. And she just makes the wise decision. We're going to go get this dude, and we're going to deliver him over. She's acting quickly to save the city even. And so I just found that that's a good application in the sense of, like, let's not hesitate. Especially when the writing's on the wall and the sin is there and it's clear before us and we're fighting against the Lord, the sooner we could do it, the better it will be. And that's what she represents. Especially knowing Joab and the mighty men of David. If they would not have handed over Sheba, then they would have kept pursuing. They are a strong force to be reckoned with. That city would have fallen. There would have been a lot of slain on their way to go get Sheba. And so it's just again, that good continued picture that if we don't deal with sin on God's terms, these little armies, God's pressure gets stronger and stronger and stronger until we get to that breaking point. And it can be avoided. So let's make sure we check the sin before it becomes so destructive in our lives. It's already destructive enough. And if we let it sit there, it can become way more destructive than it has to be. So let's cut the sin out and spare any unnecessary destruction. So moving on, we are now concluding basically with his head cut off and thrown over to Joab. This is the official end of Sheba's rebellion. It's like once your head gets cut off, it's kind of the end of it, right? But it didn't end the deeper division with Judah and David and all the different tribes. There's still an ongoing division that's going to take place. You fast forward, and eventually the kingdom is split in two, and there's like the civil war, and there's just always going to be forever not a united kingdom of Israel with one particular king. And just after David and Solomon, that's the end of it, really. And so, but interestingly enough, even though that's kind of where we're headed to, like a little bit of resolve here, and then eventually no resolve, I would just remind us, prophetically speaking, we can read our Bibles and we know that there's this massive division and there's not, a single king ruling in Israel. But soon and very soon, Jesus is going to come back and he will rule and reign from Jerusalem. And there will be a united, not just Israel, but he's going to rule over the whole world. And so I very much so look forward to that day when Jesus comes back and there is the greater than David, the greater than Solomon, Jesus Christ ruling. And we just look at the news. I know they say this like at every Calvary Chapel prophecy conference for like the past 60 years. But it really does seem closer now than it ever has been. And so I just kind of throw that in there to know that, we're in this dark time, but all these things that we're talking about, we ought to take them really serious because I want to be ready and I want to hear, well done, a good and faithful servant, knowing he's coming back soon. Let's just take full advantage of obedience now. Because I've heard these little sayings, the one thing you can't do in heaven is evangelize, right? Because everyone in heaven's already saved, right? So there's an element of God has given us callings and works predestined for us to walk in, and I want to do them now because for one, we're building up a good reward in heaven, but it's just life will be significantly different in heaven, and I want to kind of be there knowing Lord, I was well pleasing to you. Because that's a lot of the language that he uses for his children, that he wants to be, that we ought to be well-pleasing in his sight. And so let's do that. Let's take a lot of these applications that we're talking about very, very serious. So wrapping up, let's go from verse 23 to the end of the chapter, to verse 26. It says, Joab was over the whole army of Israel. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites. I don't know, I'm going to butcher all these probably. And the Pethathites, and Adoram was over the forced labor, and Jehoshaphat, the son of Elihud was the recorder, Shiva was the scribe, and Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and then Ira the Jairite was also a priest to David. And so in this closing paragraph, we're kind of just getting an update on David's administration team. Right, this is kind of how the chips have landed, how everything is settled, a reorganization of sorts. After all of the chaos of both Absalom's rebellion and Sheba's rebellion, there's a bit of normalcy happening in David's kingdom. This is showing that David's kingdom is stabilizing again. And so even though it's just a bunch of names and their titles and their jobs, and it seems like, oh, what are we really going to get out of this? It's still really important information to see that God is fighting for David, and David is God's chosen man, and God is keeping his promises to David. So even though it's just maybe to some degree pointing out that order is being established despite such turmoil, I think there's a little bit of good application that we can get if I'm just curious about some of these names. And so with that, maybe I'll call Caleb and the praise team to come back up. And I'll just close with talking about two particular guys that stood out to me before we get into our final worship set. First is our good old friend Joab. Oh, Joab. I think we've talked quite a bit about Joab as really a negative example. But once again, Joab ends up with his old job back. And there's no discrepancy, there's no dispute. David's not pushing back on this. And so I kind of look at this as one of those bittersweet things about David's reign, that Joab is yet the commander yet again. Because there's so many times where Joab is like a blessing to David, but in many respects, Joab is also a burden to David. He's fiercely loyal, but he's loyal only to his own selfish terms. That's why he's loyal to David. So although he's very effective, he's dangerous and he's selfish. He's not really the guy that you would want in that position, because he's a man that doesn't fear God. He is only out for what suits him. And so this is, out of all the choices David could have had, sometimes we're seeing David's kind of tolerating Joab's flaws just because of such a strong asset he is militarily to the kingdom of Israel. So I'm just thinking, as a reader looking at this, I wonder if sometimes we're left to scratch our head and wondering, David, what are you doing? Why are you allowing Joab to continue to lead? And this reminds me that David, yes, is a man after God's own heart, but David isn't perfect. Joab's not perfect, David's not perfect. There's no leader that is perfect. And no person will ever be perfect. You and I will never be perfect. And so as we think through that, to some degree, we should never expect perfection from anybody, and not even from ourselves. And as we look at this example of there's so much to do to strive to be like David and all the godly attributes, and even though maybe we know that we can't be perfect, we don't use that as an excuse and a justification to get away with sin, right? Oh, well, nobody's perfect. I'll just fall into the sin. No, that's not what I'm saying. We should all strive for accountability, but we should still be moved to know that we can show mercy when we all fall short. Show mercy to me, I'll show mercy to you. We got to show mercy to ourselves. It's just part of the deal. And so I kind of see that with David in the fact that Joab got his job right back. But a second person that stands out to me, even more importantly, is verse 26. Know this guy, Ira, the Jairite, and he's called a priest. Some other translations call him the chief minister. Some other call him a personal priest. There was one particular commentary where he likes to do some of his own word-for-word translations. He described Ira as a domestic chaplain to the king. There's another maybe direct translation. So in other words, I'm looking at this guy, Ira, and he's like, oh, well, David kind of hired and brought in his own intimate spiritual advisor. And it's separate from just all the other priests. Because if you look just before him, it says that Shiva was a scribe, Zadok and Abiathar were also priests at the end of verse 25. But then here's this guy, Ira, a personal priest to David, a personal spiritual advisor. And so David wanted somebody near him to pray for him. David wanted somebody near him to keep him accountable. David wanted someone who's going to come alongside of him and give him spiritual counsel for what's going on in his life. And that's exactly what a man after God's own heart does. It's a really good example for us to be men and women who seek that type of intimate friendship and that accountability, that is a high priority in our life. To have someone who could just look us in the eyes and say, hey man, how's your heart? How's your walk with Jesus? What's going good right now? What do you want to celebrate? But what are you struggling with? What do you need prayer for? And could ask really hard and tough questions. There was one of the best guys that's near and dear to my heart. his name's Kirk, if you're watching this, which you probably aren't, I love you. But he would disciple a lot of the guys when I was doing Bible college in York, England, and he would not skate around anything. You'd be talking, and you'd think that you're just talking about the weather or something. Out of nowhere, he's like, hey, man. And he would just like throw in these really hard discipleship questions. But he would do it with the biggest smile and the warmest voice. And you could just tell that he was serious, but he wasn't trying to pry and prick and get into your, like, he genuinely cared. And to this day, I really thank him for his willingness to go out there and do that. And so it should, one, maybe that'll stir us up to have the right heart, and we'll do that to others. But are we willing to let people into our life like that? Sometimes we put up these walls, and we don't want that kind of personal discipleship. We don't want a personal priest. We just want to be able to have a presentation of what's going on, but no one really knows the deeper layers. David found a guy who would get deep into the layers, and they could discuss things. And it's good to sit around and talk theology and to talk doctrine with people. That's good and helpful. But there's a totally different thing to have a man, or, if you're a woman, to have another woman in your life who's going to help you just really walk faithfully with the Lord through the hard times and to challenge us in really healthy ways. David had that with Ira, and so may we have somebody like that. Very much so like book of Proverbs. I think it's Proverbs 27, whereas one man, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. That is the heart to where hopefully it's very much important to us to say, hey, you know what? I want to bring someone into my life to sharpen me. But it's also equally important. It's like, hey, I want to make sure my life is a good reflection of the scriptures and that I'm open to the Lord using me to be the one who sharpens somebody else. So both of these things ought to be true. Have that accountability and be an accountability partner for someone. So let's pray and let's just be